The idea that survived every reason to fail. It should have died a dozen times. In review meetings, in budget cuts, in quiet conversations where practicality outweighed hope, every signal said this idea was too risky, too early, too inconvenient to survive. And yet, it refused to disappear. At the time, the company had no shortage of priorities. Core products demanded attention. Investors expected focus. Teams were stretched thin, measured by efficiency and outcomes, not imagination. In that environment, fragile ideas don't last. They're trimmed away long before they become problems. But this one lingered. To understand why it mattered, we need to go back to its origin. The idea didn't begin as a strategy. It emerged as a response to friction, a recurring limitation users kept working around instead of complaining about. The kind of frustration that rarely makes it into reports because people assume it's simply the cost of doing business. A small team noticed a pattern. Users weren't asking for new features. They were asking for fewer constraints. They wanted to move faster, connect things more freely, adapt the product to their own thinking. The existing system worked well, but only if you worked the way it expected you to. The idea challenged that expectation. It proposed a shift from guided workflows to open structures, from predefined paths to adaptable ones, from control to enablement. On paper, it sounded elegant. In practice, it threatened everything the company believed about reliability, consistency, and scale. The first objections came quickly. It would confuse users. It would strain infrastructure. It would dilute the product's identity. It would never pass compliance. Each objection was valid. Each one should have ended the discussion. And yet, the idea survived, not because it had answers, but because it aligned with something deeper the data hinted at, but never fully captured. This is where the reveal begins. Because the idea wasn't fighting for approval. It was waiting for timing, waiting for the moment when the cost of ignoring it became higher than the risk of trying. And that moment was closer than anyone realized. The idea stayed alive in the margins, resurfacing whenever teams reviewed long-term feedback or examined edge case behavior too consistent to ignore. Each time it appeared, it was postponed rather than rejected, not because it lacked merit, but because it arrived too early for the systems meant to support it. The reveal deepened. Small internal tests hinted at its power. When constraints were loosened, a subset of users moved with surprising speed and confidence. They built workflows the product had never been designed to support, extracting value far beyond what the roadmap promised. The idea didn't just improve outcomes. It changed how people thought while using the product. Still, resistance grew. Leaders questioned scalability. Engineers flagged brittle dependencies. Compliance teams warned of uncertainty. The idea demanded flexibility in an environment optimized for predictability. It asked for trust in a system designed to enforce control. And every time priorities were reassessed, it was pushed aside in favor of safer wins, until the market began shifting. Competitors introduced partial versions of the same concept, cautiously framed and tightly limited. Customers responded immediately. Adoption spiked. Conversations changed. Suddenly, the idea no longer felt theoretical. It felt late. Pressure mounted inside the company. The same objections returned, but their weight had shifted. What once sounded prudent now felt defensive. The idea hadn't changed, the context had. And the cost of waiting grew clearer with each passing quarter. The conflict intensified when leadership finally approved a larger experiment. The test expanded the idea beyond a controlled sandbox, exposing it to real usage at scale. Early results were electrifying. Engagement surged. Retention improved. Users built in ways no one anticipated. But the success came with a warning. Performance slowed in unpredictable areas. Systems strained under patterns they were never designed to handle. The idea was working. The foundation was not. And that contradiction forced the company into its hardest question yet: whether to retreat once again, preserving stability, or commit fully to rebuilding the core to support an idea that had survived every reason to fail. Because at this stage, killing it would no longer protect the company. It would only confirm that they had seen the future and chosen to ignore it. The contradiction could no longer be managed with delays or compromises. The idea had proven itself in the only way that mattered. Users embraced it instinctively, but the system beneath it groaned under the weight of that embrace, exposing limits the company had postponed confronting for years. The conflict escalated fast. Engineering reports grew longer and more urgent. Bottlenecks appeared in places no one expected. Data pipelines designed for orderly behavior now faced chaotic, creative usage. Performance dipped, then rebounded, then dipped again. The system wasn't failing outright. It was fighting the very behavior the idea encouraged. Tension spread across teams. Some argued this was proof the idea had gone too far. That flexibility was incompatible with reliability. That control was the price of scale. Others countered that the system's resistance wasn't a flaw in the idea. It was evidence the foundation was outdated. The debate wasn't technical anymore. It was philosophical. Leadership felt the pressure from all sides. Investors questioned timelines. Customers praised a new freedom but noticed instability. Competitors accelerated their own versions, learning from the company's public struggles. Every delay increased the risk of losing ownership over the idea they had nurtured in silence for so long. The emotional peak arrived during a full stress simulation. The team pushed the system to handle projected growth built around the new behavior. Within minutes, failures cascaded, not catastrophic crashes, but subtle breakdowns that compounded quickly. Latency spikes, desynchronized data, features timing out under pressure. The simulation confirmed the fear everyone shared but avoided naming. The system could not carry the idea forward, not without change. The room fell quiet as the implications settled. There was no partial solution left, no clever workaround, no incremental optimization that could bridge the gap. Supporting the idea meant dismantling parts of the architecture that had defined the product for years. It meant rebuilding under pressure. And that was the moment everything crystallized. The idea had survived every reason to fail because it was aligned with where users were going. Now the company faced its defining tests, whether to let the idea outgrow the system or rebuild the system to match the idea, because only one of those choices would allow the future to continue. They chose to rebuild the system around the idea, not because the timing was ideal, but because waiting had become the greatest risk of all. The idea had outlived every objection. What remained was a decision about identity, whether the company would continue optimizing for control or evolve into something that trusted its users enough to grow with them. The rebuild began at the core. Rigid assumptions were stripped away. Data models were redesigned to support open-ended behavior. Infrastructure once tuned for predictability was re-engineered for adaptability. Teams worked in parallel, knowing every delay increased the gap between what users wanted and what the system could deliver. It was unstable, it was uncomfortable, and it was unavoidable. Slowly, the resistance faded. As the new foundation took shape, the idea stopped fighting the system and started flowing through it. Performance stabilized. Latency disappeared. The unpredictable usage patterns that once caused failures now became strengths. Signals of creativity instead of threats to reliability. What had seemed chaotic revealed itself as a new kind of order. This was the climax. The idea that survived every reason to fail finally stood on a foundation strong enough to support it. Adoption accelerated. Users built faster, deeper, more confidently. Competitors who rushed to imitate struggled with the same architectural limits this company had already confronted and escaped. In the resolution, the lesson was clear. Great ideas don't fail because they're wrong. They fail because the systems meant to support them are built for the past. Survival doesn't come from protecting structure. It comes from rebuilding it when reality demands something new. The idea endured because it waited for the right moment, not on the roadmap, but in the world. And when that moment arrived, the company had the courage to let the idea reshape everything beneath it. Sometimes the strongest ideas aren't the loudest. They're the ones that refuse to disappear. The idea